Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Silmarillion Film Project. This is session number 30 of Season 6, and tonight we are going to be discussing episode 12, the penultimate episode of the season. No spoilers, but it doesn't end on a happy note. I know by this point in the Silmarillion Film Project, you will be shocked and appalled to hear that there are things that happen that are not necessarily cheerful, but we are coming towards the end of the events of the season, leading up towards the climax, and very exciting. So I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Nick and Marie, as usual, from our writer's room, and our special guest, Ilana Mushin from Brisbane, Australia, who was the author of our script for this time. So Ilana, so glad you could join us.
No, it's great to be here.
Yeah, I was just trying to imagine, of course, Ilana was my host down at Osmoot in January, and I was just trying to imagine Australia in wintertime, which, given that I was down there in January, was hard for me to imagine because it was not wintertime when I was down there. But anyway.
It'll be quite different from your wintertime, I'll tell you.
Right.
The lighting will be similar. Like they
right.
get darker and late, but it's not so freezing. Although because we don't have the same kind of insulation and double glazing and all of that you have, it actually is like we rug up a lot inside because it's like colder inside than outside.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Which is of course also the thing that makes unair conditioned summer up where I live intolerable, because you're in buildings which were designed to hold in the heat, in the wintertime. And so
we're designed to let it flow out.
Exactly, which is less optimal when it gets cold. All right. Anyway, so quick announcements. We've got the biggest announcement, of course. Mythmoot is coming up very soon on June 22nd. We are now just a couple weeks away from Mythmoot down in Leesburg, Virginia. I'm very excited to see everyone again for Mythmoot 10 this year. We have finished our regional moot slate for the spring, pre-Myth Moot. Looking forward to fall moots to come. Our first of which will be one of our newest moots, Cascade Moot in Portland, Oregon. We have Middle Moot coming up, New England Moot coming up, also several others which have just recently been confirmed, including a new one in New Orleans, which I think we're going to call Bayou Moot, and that's going to be on the 2nd of December. And then, of course, Ilana, we are excited about the prospect of Osmoot again next January in Sydney this time, right? As we are kind of rotate around the continent down there. Meeting new friends, so really that'll be delightful, and that's going to be the dates of that are going to be that's the last weekend in January again, right?
26th to the 28th. So we're just putting the final touches on venue booking and so on, and then we'll be good to go.
Spectacular. So looking forward to that. I'm already looking into travel arrangements and stuff for that, so I'm excited for getting back down there again. So yes, lots of fun new moots coming up again here in the coming season. But again, the next and biggest is Myth Moot in Virginia. So hope folks can join us there. All right, so let us jump into where our focus in on Doriath here. So you have you've highlighted some things. We've got the crossings that you're primarily highlighting here, Marie, in this map.
Right. So this is not strictly a bottle episode the way some of our intentionally, deliberately bottle episodes are. And yet we don't really travel anywhere in this episode outside of Doriath. So the only traveling is there's a little bit of activity in Dimbar. And I just highlighted some river crossings so we could see where people could cross to travel between Brethel and Doriath and how that might look. I thought that might be helpful.
So basically, if you're going from Menegroth to Brethel, to Amonobo, you would have to go either south of the Esgalduin and all the way around, the ravines of Taiglin up around that way, or go up through Neldarith, cut through Dimbar and come down across the Brithiach and down that way, right?
Correct. Those are the two options.
Which is the option they take, right?
They take the northerly option in the story, yes.
Which turns out ill under the circumstances. Yeah. The longer route, the longer way around in the comparatively wolf-free zone might have been better, but how are they to know? So, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So, but pretty much the majority, we've got the River Mindeb, which is important to remember, that features in this episode. That's where Karkaroth is first sighted, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Now, the one thing, and I've always been curious about the fact that this never appears on the map itself. That is, where exactly the boundaries of the girdle are.
Right. That would be a helpful thing to know.
It really would. He mentions it like a little bit, but he doesn't exactly go around and say precisely where the boundaries are. But we're basically treating it as sort of in the forest of Neldoreth, essentially, right? Or at least like at the boundaries, or within, but it's probably not right at the
what I was
boundaries
imagining
necessarily. Yeah.
That was what I imagined.
Right. Dimbar, the way they talk about Dimbar, as sort of the frontier, right? I'm thinking, of course, especially, Beleg and Turin, in Turin's early days and stuff. You get the pretty clear impression that Dimbar is not inside the girdle, but, no, see, I'm sorry. I was gonna say I remember this other passage, but no, I remember Thingol's. There's that reference to how Thingol wanted to make sure that like part of his realm includes, the Syrian, and like that there's this like other part that's.
But that's Nivrim, which is the lower part below the bridge.
Right.
So below the bridge, there's an oak forest on the other side of the Syrian River, and that's the part where Syrian is part of Doriath.
Right.
So
just below the letter D on the map, right? This
correct.
This bit here, yeah.
That's Nivrim, and possibly above the letter D as well. Again, I don't actually know the boundaries of Nivrim. Presumably, if you were there, you would see where the oak trees end, and that's the boundary. But the idea is therefore that north of the bridge, probably only the east bank of the Syrian would be part of Doriath. But does the girdle go right along the edge of the river? Is it some depth into the forest?
Just because Thingol considers Nivrim part of Doriath, and therefore
is that inside or outside the girdle? Right. And we know the borders of Nivrim aren't within the girdle, because that's where Luthien is when Huan first finds her. So she's clearly outside the protections of Doriath at that point. Right. But
but where does that line happen is the other question.
Right. Like, and the borders of Doriath versus the location of the girdle, are they synonymous? Probably not. Yeah.
Well, in my my estimate is that the forest there is probably about, I want to say 20 miles wide at its widest point there, which would suggest to me that the girdle could extend into the forest a fair amount, while still leaving some of it accessible to the outside.
Possibly. That would put the encounter, that first encounter with Huan, like just across the girdle, basically. Like, you've taken 3 steps across the girdle, and oh, look, it's Kelgorm and Corfin. Right. So, that's a little. I mean,
I can tell I'm outside the girdle because you're here.
Right.
Exactly. Right. They're Panorians. It's a dead giveaway.
Fancy meeting you here.
Yes. No, it is. I haven't reflected on this very much, but it is a little bit odd to me that there's no indicator, that there's never any indicator. I mean, I don't remember ever seeing a Silmarillion map which had any indication of where the girdle is. And
I think the one in the Atlas might have it.
Yeah.
Maybe, but
maybe. I've
based on what,
lived
though?
in the Atlas for a while. Yeah, I know exactly. It's
but I feel like the ambiguity of it seems intentional.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you don't know where the boundary between our world and the other world is in the middle of the river,
right?
Until you cross it. You don't know.
Well, I mean,
where in the wardrobe, whether you're in Narnia or England in the wardrobe, until you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the Girdle of Melian is one of the most explicit kind of border of fairy elements in Tolkien stories. So yes, I mean, that does on the one hand, I totally get that. On the other hand, I always feel reading the stories, I always feel like they're assuming I know where there's several places in the stories where
because they know.
Yeah. They know exactly.
The writers knew exactly where it was.
It's not a mystery to anybody in the story but me, right? So yeah, I mean, at least that's certainly what I always.
It's like there will be places in the Bible where the text says, by this place that you should obviously know about.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the pool where the healing pool where the angel would come through and stir the waters.
Trouble the waters, yeah.
But that story eventually got lost to time, and somebody had to come in and explain, like, oh, by the way, this is why they're doing this.
Right. The pool of Siloam, yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. No, I agree. It has that kind of impression. And again, and perhaps, that's another one of those kind of textual artifacts, right? That, like, of course, the people telling these stories wouldn't necessarily be like, and by the way, you should know, for like posterity that this is exactly where. It's just that there's so many other places, like in Of Beleriand and its realms, where he does explain exactly where even again the passage that I'm remembering, which in my mind I had kind of associated that with, like, well, this is where the girdle goes, right? I mean, if somebody had asked me, I would have been like, well, yeah, there's that passage, but then I'm thinking, no, wait, actually, he doesn't say that. He's talking about the political jurisdiction of Thingol, which we know to be not exactly, coterminous with the girdle. Anyway. Yeah. Anyway, okay.
I was assuming that when Thingol's making sure everybody's in the girdle when Karkaroth's around, that not everybody was within the girdle up until that point.
Yeah, I mean,
he started the ball rolling after the Dagor Bragollach, but now this is a bit more imminent.
Right. There's a difference between, maybe you want to think about living within flight distance of the Girdle of Melian, and like, between that and, it's the difference between making sure you're not far from a tornado shelter and like huddling in the tornado shelter, right? Which is clearly the call that Thingol's making there. Okay. Anyway, we can talk more about that, but I just want to, it was interesting to me. One of the things that I was reflecting on, though, was that there's only been a handful of times when this question, like, where exactly does the girdle lie, has come up. I mean, we've not been kind of up against that a few times, like when the Haladin were coming across, right? We had to kind of think about that then, and them being at the boundaries of the girdle. But again, there just have not been a large number of instances where it has made crucial sort of story difference.
I think more in season 5 than any other season, because that's when
with the humans roaming around and
right
stuff.
Well, the Estelad people out on the plains there, kind of bumping up against the edges of Doriath and whatnot on occasion.
But even there, it was still mostly like, roughly the forest. Basically, it's the forest. And trying to specify further than that was not something.
Oh, it's on the Brethel side that it's way less clear.
Yeah, because it's all forest. Is it right at the river? Is it in the middle of the river? Is it across the river? Yes, exactly. Okay. Anyway, all right. So today's episode, Ilana, tell me about the the title?
Well, Marie helped a lot with the title. And we were just trying to, so it was the achievement of the quest was
Right.
the title, and that's the last line spoken in the episode. Yes. So this was a Sindarin rendering of that.
Very frustratingly, as far as I can tell, Tolkien never came up with an Elven word in any of his Elvish languages for quest.
Yes.
Like, so, it feels like a very clear.
It's because because quest is the Elvish word.
Well, or the opposite of that. It's because quest is French.
Yeah. Well, that's
which is the opposite of Elvish.
Right. So I was like, okay. Well, what's a synonym for quest that I could use to find?
Oh yeah, like adventure is too. Adventure's a French word.
Aventure,
so yeah, I think what we ended up with was essentially task.
Yeah.
So the job's done. Is not quite the same language as the quest is achieved.
It's so German, and therefore Anglo-Saxon.
What, the job's done?
No, task.
Oh, task. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's no, that is a really interesting thing. Well, I mean, I'm flashing back to Verlin Flieger lecture on this, where she was talking about like the word quest and the word adventure and the Tolkien's choice of those words and using those words as he does. Adventure primarily in The Hobbit, of course, it's about the adventure, and then the shift to the word quest in The Lord of the Rings, which is in some ways a sort of a striking choice. I mean, I seem to remember her talking about the absence of quest words in the Elvish language.
Why is English so? I mean, maybe Old English might have something more comparable, but like modern English has no words for this that aren't French.
Well,
expedition, adventure, voyage, like it's all coming from the French.
Oh, it's all like Latinate. Yeah. Well, I mean,
all right. So it's possible that has something to do with the issue here. Is that if the Old English people didn't need a word for it, then the elves didn't either. But I found it frustrating.
It is,
but I don't mind it being. I mean, quest is it has a particular in modern English has a particular meaning associated with like seeking something or achieve, that sort of thing. Whereas this did feel like it was a task accomplished rather than a quest. Because the quest was achieved by getting the Silmaril out of Angband in a sense.
Right. I love the irony of the title, right? I mean, the quest. There's a kind of delightful fake out in the title of this episode without actually being dishonest, right? I mean, it's the quest achieved by itself sounds like when seen in an episode list, it sounds cheerful, right? It doesn't sound like the episode where the protagonist dies at the end, right?
Except when I hear the words just the quest, all I hear is Galadriel's voice saying, "The quest will claim his life." Right. And anyone who's familiar with that,
right,
with that trailer line, will have immediate ominous feelings about
it. Right. Can hear that.
Well, and the fact that this is episode 12 of a 13 episode season.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The fact that the second to last episode is the quest accomplished and yet it's not the end of the season should perhaps, if you're not on your guard, set you on your guard just a little bit. But it's also not wrong. Like the quest is in fact achieved in this episode. And I just want to say we'll get into some more details later and stuff, but I wanted to say in general, Ilana, I loved the way in which you guys were bringing Thingol's perspective to a kind of closure in this episode. Like I thought I really, really loved that. I really loved how that came across. I mean, there's an obvious sense. And of course, again, like everyone, all the characters were very aware of this sense of the irony, right? That, you know, the death of Beren in the hunt for the wolf is like the final, you know, fruition of Thingol's thing, right? Of what Thingol did, the final consequences of Thingol's actions. But having Thingol himself aware of that and his own repentance for that, his own perception of not just that he shouldn't have done that to Beren and therefore also to Luthien, right? But, you know, the way in which he is clearly perceiving this as, you know, the fulfillment also, or the beginning of the fulfillment of Melion's forebodings about how he has brought evil upon Doriath, as a whole. Again, not just for Beren and Luthien themselves, but upon Doriath entirely, and his own like taking responsibility for that. And it was nice to see, you know, his, again, not only just kind of nice to see a little bit of redemption arc for Thingol, which of course we'd always been sort of planning and hoping for, you know, at this point in the story, but even just the way that it felt like it really kind of came around. It seems to me that one of the really like sort of fascinating and interesting things about the Beren and Luthien story as a whole, right, is you know, like the Return of the King's film, the Return of the King film, as everybody was complaining about, right, has all these endings, right? You know, and of course, and I'm sure many other Tolkien fans had the same reaction, which is that it seemed totally fitting. Like I noticed that, but I was like, well, yeah, of course it has 5 endings. Like it's supposed to have 5 endings. Like there are a whole bunch of different things to end, right? You know, and it was only like people, you know, who knew nothing about Tolkien, who were like, it was so weird, it faked me out. I thought the movie was over, and then it wasn't. And I'm like, how could you think it was over? Like, that part had ended, but there were other things. Anyway, like, so like that whole idea of like this sort of nested endings of the story, which we do get in The Lord of the Rings. But in the story of Beren and Luthien, we get a similar kind of thing, right? Where you get like the escape from Angband, and the eagles come, hooray! The end, sort of happily ever after, but maimed, right? And then you get similarly, you get like the rescue of Beren from the tower, right? Oh, hooray, now they're together, happily ever after, except not, right? And then you get the next ending of the escape from Angband. And then you get the wedding and the literal happily ever after, right? But then you get the hunt from the wolf, and now he's dead. And that in itself, again, feels like not just like a different ending or a different false ending. Like each one is kind of tying up different things, right? The way in which their own relationship and sort of union comes together after the rescue from the tower, and they're not going to be separated. And after they still have to sort that out a little bit, but anyway, they're not separated, going to be separated again after that. You've got the success of the quest for the Silmarillion, as you said, like getting the thing out, cutting it out of Morgoth's crown and getting mostly away, kind of with it, is definitely a very significant win, right? And especially this gets emphasized in the script that we had for that one, with the deaths of Diriel and many of the other prisoners. That makes the escape of Beren and Luthien feel even more like a victory, right? They've given their lives so that Beren and Luthien can escape, and Beren and Luthien do escape, right? Hooray! The end, sort of, right?
Yeah, that's because there kind of needed to be a cost, right?
Yeah.
Beren loses his hand. There is a cost.
Yeah.
But it definitely needed to feel like they didn't get off scot-free. Somebody had to pay the price, and not just them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and as I said, it adds a sense of closure, a sense of accomplishment. It really emphasized, it's not like there wasn't a sense of accomplishment to them escaping Angband, but I get more of that, right? The closure at the end of the hunt for the wolf with the accomplishment of the quest, right, is even stronger, and it just feels like one of Sam Gamgee's sad ending stories, right, where the story has come to its end, it has come to its its fulfillment, and it just happens to have been a sad ending. And there are even ways, of course, in which that feels tragic but also almost inevitable, right? Almost inevitable in the sense of like, well, Luthien was going to be a widow sooner or later anyway. This was sooner, right? But well,
that's what Baron's thinking.
Yeah,
as he's done. I mean,
yeah,
essentially.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the way that gets set up by the scoffing of Cyros and his companions earlier on in the episode, right? To kind of emphasize that, which Cyros, what a useful guy to have around, isn't he? Right? Like anytime you just want, like, you don't need an evil elf, just an unpleasant elf, right? Like he's very handy. He's very handy.
I gave him some unpleasant friends as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every once in a while you need somebody to hold the jerk ball. And
and especially since we're removing that from Thingol here, it's
And I mean, you could definitely make the case that Cyros kind of is in the Silmarillion to be that character.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. That's definitely the role that he played. I mean, somebody's got to get their face smashed, and it turned out to be him.
But it's not exactly character assassination to have him say these things.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
It's more establishing.
Exactly. It's just set up for so that his, the face smashing will come less out of. In fact, it will just be like the more satisfying when it finally happens. If you've actually been wanting to throw something at this guy's head for years already, because we introduced Cyros back in season 3, so I mean, it's he has a long-standing record at this point.
I think he was useful in this episode because there was still a question about whether Baron was going to be accepted in Doriath,
yes.
And we were kind of exploring that a bit. And MLD is not so sure that that's the case as well. So I think it was good to have someone we could sort of show that it wasn't a uniform, oh, well, the king says it's okay, so we say it's okay.
Exactly. Kind of and the way that the conversation between Cyros and his companions, was clearly sort of balanced against in the setting off the conversation between Mablung and Baron, where Mablung was, expressing his significant acceptance of Baron. I agree. If that had stood completely alone, it would have been a little bit harder to accept, I think, in some ways, right? I mean, it's instead of asking the viewers to imagine that the entire culture of Doriath has just flipped the switch, right? They've been sort of instructed by Thingol essentially to be resistant to humans, and now, oh, it's okay, I've changed my mind, everything's fine, and everyone else is going to immediately change their minds too, or whatever. So yeah, I did like that. Anyway, what I was trying to build up to before was the very ending of the Baron and Luthien story is quite unexpected and in some ways unaccountable, right? I mean, this is kind of the end of the story by rights. Like, this should be the end of the story. This is the end of, the end of the love story. He's dead, right? Like, they're separated. They did live happily ever after for a little
says
while.
That explicitly, doesn't he? In that
right,
that's the end of the Silmaril story.
Right. But then there's this, so even the idea, it isn't just what happens in the rest of the story, but even that there is a rest of the story is itself a kind of eucatastrophe, is itself an unexpected turn. And I think I felt like the degree of closure with the way that the deaths of Hurin and Baron came in together, especially with the way that those, you know, the character of Huan was developed. Did I say Hurin? Huan, if I did. Sorry, I'm doing the wanderings of Hurin from the War of the Jewels on Wednesday nights, so I'm thinking about Hurin a lot too. Anyway, the way that Huan's character was developed over the course of the season, right? And connected with Baron and Luthien. Anyway, when you thinking back to everything that we've seen, right? To everything that we've done, to the story as we've told it in these first 12 episodes, it feels done, right? I mean, there's it feels like a sad but satisfying ending, right? And there's obviously still some what happens next. Like, okay, now they have the Silmaril. Now what, right? Now what's going to happen with the Fëanorians, right? Yeah, exactly. Like it's not like there clearly is a need for more story after this, but this story, you know, seems done in the same way that the Dagor Bragollach is done, right? When after Fingolfin's death, but it's not so. So it'll be interesting to see sort of the transition in next time, you know, because at the same time as it seems like an addition, like the story is over and now there's this extra thing. It's not just a coda, you know, it's not just an epilogue to that story.
That was one of the reasons I think that Marie had suggested, and I put in, that we don't hear Luthien say, "Wait for me," in this episode.
Yes.
We're going to hear it in next episode. We're going to hear it in flashback.
That was,
so we have the whispering to Baron. That was
the whispering.
Marisa.
I noticed that the way it was happening off screen. I mean, and that was definitely one of the most striking choices that I was noticing in this episode was the whispering. And I was guessing that was happening. I mean, it certainly had the effect. Not hearing what she said to him certainly had the effect of leaving, you know, as the credits roll in this episode, this sense of sadness but closure, right? And I love that, actually. Yeah, loved that. Okay, so where are we? Starting off. Yeah, I haven't started yet. That's where we are. So the A plot is the hunt for the wolf, which you know, is not just when they like set out to hunt it, right? But there's the whole approach of the wolf and figuring. By the way, did we, Maria and Nick, I forget, did we decide how big Karkaroth is? I know we talked about it before.
I think that we have landed on like somewhat larger than a horse, I think, but smaller than like a full-size van.
Yeah, full-size van. Yeah, exactly. Significantly bigger. So he's bigger than a horse. He's not as big as an elephant, maybe. Yeah. Okay.
He is definitely bigger than a bread box, Evan.
Yeah, for sure.
Quite large. The general idea is that he needs to be bigger than Drogluin, right?
Right. He needs to be bigger than Drogluin and significantly larger than Huan.
Right.
And Huan we have as like very large Irish wolfhound, right? Not
correct.
Yeah. But like vaguely within the range of
kind of like the picture behind you.
Yeah.
Corey. That like the picture behind you of Huan.
Right.
The background is that looks about right.
Yes, where she's riding on his back, but like, you know,
she looks a little too large to be.
She looks just slightly too large. Like if he weren't so strong and hardy, he would have a hard time with her riding. The way her knees are pulled up there, this is the Naismith image, of course, of Luthien riding on Huan. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So Karkaroth larger than a horse, basically. I was just wanting to make sure I was picturing it correctly.
Yeah. Because we definitely want it to look like an uneven fight.
Yes.
When the two of them are going at it.
Yes. And even just to convey the sense of terror that Tolkien describes, you know, of this, you know, it's Karkaroth's coming is much more than just there's a really big wolf. I mean, this is like this sort of unstoppable force. The thing that differentiates him from Glaurung on the Loose, which is what we ended season 5 on, right? Was no.
4
is what I meant to say. Yeah, season 4. Season 5 ends with the battle and him coming out the second time. Season 4 ends with him coming out the first time. The difference there is that Karkaroth is just mindlessly destroying anything in his path, right? It's the ferocity of his seeking, and whereas Glaurung, though mischievous and frolicsome in his younger days, there was nevertheless still intelligent and purposeful in what he did, rather than simply an arbitrary force of destruction, which is what we get from Karkaroth. Okay. And by the way, seeing him from the point of view of the humans there at the beginning was, I thought, effective in that way. I really like the way that it ended up kind of scaffolding our reactions to Karkaroth, right? Like first we see him chase down animals, and then we see him encounter humans who are not totally defenseless, but also not best prepared to defend themselves against something like this. And then we see him against the elvish marsh wardens, right? And then we see him against, the all-star team that comes out to hunt him, right? So that seemed like
he mows down a pack of wolves in the first.
that's the very first one. Yeah, exactly. Yes. I really liked Icon. I also liked the scene where the humans were running and trying to hide from Karkaroth. And one of the things that I liked about it was the perceptiveness of that. Like normally hiding from a scent-based hunter like a wolf is totally useless, right? I mean, you can get up a tree, perhaps, like the dwarves do in The Hobbit, but hunkering down under bushes generally not going to help when something is tracking you by scent, right? And yet the perception that Karkaroth is not stalking things by scent, right?
Yeah.
He is just chasing down anything he can see, and is way faster than any of you. So don't run, hide, which would, perhaps not be the impulse with something like that. So
and humans are not built to do that very well. Different people are different, obviously, and there are people who will freeze
right
under that kind of stress. But our inclination, there's a reason why they call it a fight or flight instinct.
Fight or flight. Hide is not one of the normal parameters there. Yeah.
Right. Like we want to either fight back or run, because that's kind of what we're built to do.
Yes. Sudden bursts of adrenaline are not good for hiding.
So I have to say, I was drawing a little bit on my recent experience in Southern Africa on safari.
Yes. I can imagine.
We were given when encountering potentially dangerous animals.
But you had to be given those instructions because they don't come naturally to us.
You wouldn't do it automatically, right?
Right. And
and don't run was like number one.
Oh yeah. Right. Well,
food runs.
Yeah.
Food runs.
Yes.
Yeah. The general idea is if you have turned your back on a predator, they know you can't see them.
Right.
This is less likely to end well for you.
Well, right. I also, there were two other details about that scene that I really liked. Is one, Emildir willing to sacrifice a doomed companion, which
that was a hard call. Like that was yeah.
And two is the two humans that do run, and realizing that they're toast, they intentionally decide to make the sacrifice play.
Right, to try to draw it off in a different direction. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that is consistent with the way that we have portrayed humans interacting with the monstrous world in which they find themselves. That's harkens back to the whole thing when the Holodine came to Brethel. You know, when Haleth, was able to kill Tevildo.
Yeah.
Specifically with that kind of approach.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's very cool. I love the thing about Beren and Luthien's domestic life, but let's okay, we're going to talk about Beren and Luthien next, so let's talk about that.
Oh my gosh, that's maybe the only scene of its kind thus far in some film.
Yeah, the scene where they're talking about living together. Yeah. It was. I loved it. I loved the and I was so happy when their house was hideously destroyed. Like, just in that, like, it was so perfect. Like, it wasn't the event. It was the perfect fittingness of the thing that I loved. But
I mean, they're going to rebuild it in Assyrian.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
We've maybe created a new rule in film that if a couple has a good relationship, the place where they meet will now be horribly desecrated by a future event. If the couple has a terribly dark relationship, then the place where they meet will be preserved in perpetuity.
Wow, this is a really specific rule.
Right? Unfortunately, there's like already 5 examples that fit this.
Okay, so on the one hand, we have like also the sort of duplication practically, right, with Thingol and Melian and
yeah.
Well,
and
that's the thing. Thingol and Melian meet in a place that then becomes a dark evil forest.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's no good. And
Right.
then we have Andreth and Aignor meeting at Tarn Iloin for their secret meetings.
Right.
And obviously
Which will
Tarn
be
Iloin
desecrated later on, right?
is the scene of the end of the Outlaws.
Right.
Then we haven't obviously figured out how we're going to handle Turn and Finduilis or Turn and Nienor, but anything Turn related probably isn't going to be great.
It's not going to end well.
And we're going to destroy the Pools of Ivern at some point, so that's probably related to Gwyndor's relationship with Finduilis. Like there's things we can do here, but anyway, I think this was this Evan or Dylan who came up with that idea. One of them did.
It sounds like a Dylan thing, actually.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now who it was, but
what are the?
I think it was Dylan. Yeah.
Which ones?
Evan says it's Dylan.
Yeah.
Which ones?
Get preserved forever.
Get preserved forever.
Well, there's only 3 spots in Beleriand that are going to survive. So we've got Dorthonion becomes the island, right? And so that's Gorlam and Ilanel. Their house.
Their house, right.
will live forever.
Right.
So that's that one. And then Tol Morwen survives.
Right.
And that's going to be Turn and Nienor, I assume.
Right.
And then Himring. So I guess you just have to ask the question of what is Maedhros' relationship to Fingon, but we'll just leave that alone. It doesn't end well, though. It definitely doesn't end well for Fingon.
Right. Yep.
Well, it was, like what I was trying to work out what the Beren and Luthien post-wedding plans for their lives would be, because he's not.
It's a great question.
He's going to be gone very soon by Elven standards. But then we know that elves obviously go straight from marriage to the time of the children, which had to be immediately on their minds.
Well, especially, right. We can't exactly do that whole let's wait a couple centuries first thing. So yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like elves do actually go immediately from marriage into that. even by Elven standards.
It does. It does. But I loved the concept, and of course I feel like I always feel in these episodes where we're talking about scripts, I often feel guilty that we don't do more. I don't want to spend the whole time summarizing, but I also know that many people listening won't necessarily have read the script, and so I don't want to take too much for granted. But so the concept was that Baron was assuming that they would have to stay at Menegroth, right? That they've gotten married. He's looking around Menegroth like, okay, so home now. This is home. We're here. And the welcome by Mablung is very encouraging, but the resistance from this is where I felt that the resistance from Syros was really paying off, right? Because there's, especially I'm thinking back to how far we went out of our way in the early episodes of the season to show the Luthien effect, right? Everyone loves Luthien and is touched by Luthien, and whenever Luthien is around, everyone is always, and therefore, what is it like to be Mr. Luthien, right? Like to be what's their reaction going to be? Like all of those people who light up as soon as Luthien comes into the room, what's their reaction going to be to this guy? Or, to the mortal ball and chain that she's stuck with, right? I mean, that's weird. Like, and I could easily see that would be an awkward life for Baron to try to lead. The idea, therefore, of her saying, no, we need to go, we can go off on our own. Let's build a separate house. Let's build a house out in Eldereth where we met. Basically, let's go back to that time that we spent alone in the woods together, in the early, and let's just spend the rest of our lives that way. Which again, from the perspective of knowing the story, had this really double-edged delightfulness to it, right? On the one hand, it's this beautiful vision of let's go back and just redo the fairy tale of our meeting for the rest of our lives. Have every day be, every morning you wake up and say Tenuviel, Tenuviel, right? I mean, it's every afternoon we're dancing in the forest, right?
And it's interesting because it also might remind us of the cottage that we have created for Gilrain living in Rivendell.
Right.
It's similarly in a perfectly safe elven realm. Right. There is this very human looking cottage, that
yes.
Yeah, people are trying to live a human life.
Right.
So and Luthien is, because she's now visited a human village.
Yes.
He's like, we can bring some of your culture in.
Yeah, we can throw some dirt on the floor.
Exactly. We can bathe regularly. All kinds of things, to make you feel more comfortable.
Hang preserved meats from the ceiling.
Sure, whatever you think. Well, not Baron, I suppose.
Yeah. I forgot.
Yeah. Right. But yeah, no, it's so her that extra step then of her saying let's do the human thing. It didn't come across to me as sort of condescending, let us, or some kind of inappropriate appropriation on Luthien's part, let us pretend to be primitives like your people. It was nice. It was this sense of this is the marriage, right? We're living in Fairy, right? In Doriath, inside the girdle of Melian, but we're also going to be, living in a place where he would be comfortable, roughing it out by himself in the countryside, which is where Baron lives, right? Anyway, so as I said, there was a really double-edged pleasure to the prospect, right, of their living together at this house. The one was, again, that idea of the perpetuation of this image of the perpetuation of the fairy tale, which, by the way, reminds me of Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, right? The idea of her, him coming back with the water lilies, and her sitting there amidst the water lilies in their house, like he first saw her. The fact that exactly what they serve for dinner for the hobbits is word for word a quotation of the poem describing their wedding feast. right? It's like the one line, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it's the only line from the Adventures of Tom Bombadil poem that's imported word for word into the Lord of the Rings Tom Bombadil chapters, is that, we have yellow cream and honeycomb and fresh herbs gathered, right? Like all of that, it's like 2 lines describing the feast. And it's the description in the poem of their wedding feast. And it's what they served the hobbits for dinner. Like, wedding feast every day. We're still saying it's like every day they've been on a honeymoon for however long they've been, right? They're still eating the wedding leftovers all these years later. And so again, it had that sweetness on the one hand of that sort of, almost impossible vision of peace and happiness and literally happily ever after, right? It's like the fairy tale come to life. But then at the same time, I also was aware of the fact that what she was describing was not a house in Neldareth. Like, it was the house in Osirian is what I'm thinking of. Like that is going to happen, but it's not, I knew it was going to happen like they were envisioning, right? And yet it's not that it's not going to happen either. It's not that it's just going to lead to tragedy instead. It's just going to be displaced, and not only displaced in space, but it's going to be a completely different, instead of, and the way in which the vision that they had was not only so similar to what was actually going, not only was it this picture of what I knew was never going to happen, but was a beautiful idea, but it's not only similar to what is actually going to happen in Osirian, right? But it's also like an inversion of it, if you see what I mean, right? Like, she's picturing this melding, right, of human and elf, right? This like perfect half elf life in the middle of the forest, right? And in the end, they're going to be like apart from everyone, right? Instead of bringing everything together, they're going to be both of them together, but separated from both humans and elves. Like, that's in Osirian. Again, there are green elves around. It's not like they're not, they're cut off from all elfdom, as they are cut off from all humanity, we're told. But still, do you see what I mean about the way in which that seems an inversion? Anyway, the similarities and differences, that I love that.
When we see them in Osirian at their house, that's going to have a resonance, I hope. Yeah. Comes this episode.
Yeah. But both in the sense of a fulfillment, right? Like, oh, hey, look, they're getting to live the dream after all, right? But it's not going to be the dream. Like, it's not, what they get in Osirian is not the happily ever after that they're thinking about here in Doriath. Again, it's not exactly the opposite of it, right? It's not, they are going to be able to live together and presumably happily in some, but it's not the picture that they had imagined. Even their relationship with Menegroth, like, they're not going to have to live in Menegroth, but they're not going to be that far away either, right? It's there would still have been elves when they wanted them, right? Like her family when she wanted it, less so in Osirian, of course. Though the Galadriel link is fascinating. But Nick, go ahead.
It's like living like 40 minutes from your family. Like, they're close enough that they could babysit, like the kids if you needed to go out, but they're not going to be over every day.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like, going to, like, when I went to college a 2.5 hour drive from home, right? It was perfect, right?
You can still get home on weekends to do laundry, no problem.
Precisely. And that happened. But mom and dad aren't going to just show up either. So yeah. Anyway, then, as I said, I loved the destruction, Karkaroth coming in and destroying everything, right? And I loved that because of the way in which this sort of clear indicator of this can't happen just because the quest isn't achieved yet, right? You're still, the thing that I felt that conveyed really, really clearly was it's been a while now. I mean, this is the second episode since Angband, right? They escape Angband at the end of episode 10. We've had all of episode 11, mostly in Brethil, but getting to Doriath as well. And now we've had this peaceful episode in Doriath. And it really seems like, okay, like the bad times are over, right? There may be some awkwardness yet to come, and Cyros is still a jerk, and Thingol feels awkward and should. But, you know, like it's now going to become a sitcom instead of a tragedy, right? And yet Karkaroth's appearance, you know, is sort of the harbinger of, but again, it's not just that his appearance means the drama of the story isn't over. Their story can't achieve peace, like the kind of peace that they were attempting to establish by building that house. That peace is destroyed. That's why it felt so fitting to me that Karkaroth comes in and wrecks their house, and kills the laborers, you know, and they come to the place which they had imagined as this place of peace and retreat for them, and there's corpses there, right? Such a visceral, shocking shattering of that dream, right? So much more powerful than simply like, you know, I had briefly thought about retiring, but now I see like I still must answer the call, and so I'm going to nobly turn my back on that and move forward. I mean, we get that from Baron still in this episode, but it isn't only that, right? We get this very clear indicator. No, their destiny, their doom will not allow that, right? And
it's not like Rocky coming out of retirement one last time to fight Ivan Drago, you know?
Right. No, it's
and it's
not.
also an important point for Thingol too, because seeing the corpses of people is
within the girdle, right?
Yeah. I mean that's the most bringing it home for him about what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, and even that, even having the site of the would-be site of Baron and Luthien's future happy domestic abode be the spot where Thingol's standing there saying, I have failed my people. It's just that was also a really powerful overlay. I felt a really cool juxtaposition. Yeah, not to mention, I mean, even because there's so many ways in which I felt it so fitting and awesome. That's why I love this. At the beginning and at the end of this story, we have two transgressions, right? Two crossings of the girdle by uninvited people who theoretically should not be able to do it, right? Baron at first and Karkaroth, you know, at the end. And the way that those two crossings of the girdle, and that they should happen in basically the same place, right? That was a really perfect and but also like low key, right? It was not a really sort of in your face you know, grouping between the two of them, but just, you know, all we had was Luthien saying, yeah, we're gonna build a house where we met, you know, i.e. right near that place where you crossed the girdle and ended up here. And then of course that's the same place that Karkaroth goes. So again, just like the whole framing of that was just gorgeous as well. So it just it was the effect as I was reading the script was one of those perfect effects where I didn't see it coming. Like I didn't, you know, when the house was being built, I wasn't like, oh man, I bet Karkaroth's going to wreck that place. Like that did not, I was thinking all about like, oh, what a beautiful idea of the, like I was thinking about the honeymoon and, you know, the happily ever after. And I'm like, and I knew it was going to happen. And I was thinking about Assyrian and everything. But then like the way in which the framing of that and Karkaroth coming in, it was one of those things that wasn't a surprise. That wasn't, I wasn't anticipating it, but when it happened, I was like, yeah, of course, that's perfect. That must have happened. Like that should be happening here. Really loved that. What we've had several moments. This was so okay. In the Baron and Luthien story, we were talking about the quest, right? And the significance of the quest and their call and their duty and the way that this breaks in on, them and the doom that lies upon them and everything. But although that's been involved all the way through, we've had all of this like working on our relationship stuff happening in this season. We've had so much more of that in this season than we've had anyway. I mean, the Andreth and Ignor stuff is the closest we've ever come to that really in this. I mean, I think of the relation we've shown relationships, like we've shown marriages before. Yeah. We got them, but even there, like, we never had Galadriel and Celeborn like talking about their relationship. Like we had them getting to know each other, and we had, significant choices being made, but like the episode, what was it? Was it episode 8? When the one right after the Leap of Baron episode, was it 9? We have to work out our relationship issues. Yes, it was 9, right before we went to Angband, right? Have we ever had an episode like that, right? Which is mostly about like, let's talk about our feelings and what we're doing in our relationship. Like that's not familiar ground. For some film as a whole.
we had Feanor and Nerdanel's relationship, which was basically Nerdanel trying to talk Feanor into not being a jerk about his mother-in-law situation. Well, the mother and stepmother situation, whatever it was. She was. Yeah.
But there was certainly a tempestuous quality to their relationship that is quite different.
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying that we've never had relationship development or we've had lots of good relationships and bad relationships and things, but just
whole focus just on the relationship instead of there's a relationship happening, but can I draw your attention to this drama over here?
Right. Like in the context, like this drama includes a husband and wife, and we will see some of their interactions during the drama, right? Yeah. That's very different from what we've had with Baron and Luthien, and having brought them now to being married. And by the way, Ilana, one of the low-key things I really admired about this script was like I thought you did a great job of including lots of adorable newlywed Baron and Luthien scenes that were not like horrible. I feel like if I were writing them, like it would have been like intolerable smarm, or like it's really hard to write that kind of scene well and not.
Yes, it's hard. But I mean, I again was drawing a little bit on recalling some of the ways that my husband and I talked to each other when we were newlyweds, like getting used to the idea of calling each other husband and wife and so on. So you just repeated at each other and so on. So I included that. But also because there were these earlier episodes, they're not getting to know each other. They've been through so much together that didn't need to be, they don't need to talk about it because lived it. They already know each other really. I mean, I had what I was trying to convey in this episode is that they actually really understand each other really well. They don't have to. I tried to make sure they may not be thinking the same thing. So Luthien's idea of the house was new to Baron and so on, but there's no real conflict between them. They are on the same page. And the hardest thing I had in this episode was to create pretexts to separate them. Because there's a couple of scenes where I wanted Baron alone without Luthien there to have a conversation with someone else. And that was difficult because they're doing everything together.
Yes. Yeah. You have to admit the scene when she went off like berry picking without him. I was like,
Yeah.
I had this really ominous feeling. I'm like, oh man, something horrible is going to happen now that she's gone off.
I just had to set up a conversation with Mablung.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That was the one about Baron's concern that the humans were going to get attacked by Karkaroth, right? Was that?
Well,
that
he
one?
was. Yeah, he was still. Oh, I mean, Mablung had come with news that they had got back to his mother had got back to Brethel safely.
Okay.
It was just after Galadriel had left.
Right.
So they're outside anyway, and Mablung comes up, and then Luthien goes off berry picking, leaving an awkward kind of pairing now of Beren and Mablung, and so the conversation emerges from that.
Yeah. Yep. But
and
anyway,
having
like that.
Beren and Thingol talking to each other during the hunt for the wolf. Again, it was really hard to get Luthien off doing something else. So that
right. Yes. Galadriel's role was really interesting as well. One of the things, of course, that was one of the big picture things I was thinking about with Galadriel's involvement there was, again, thinking about what I was saying earlier about them going to, I almost said Osiriand. I'm just displacing my Tolkien names tonight. I'll give the first couple letters and then give up. But anyway, when they go off to Osiriand, there's this sense. I feel that the way that it's presented in the Silmarillion presents it with like, and then they went off and were never seen again. Like, and we know it's not that they have no contact with anyone. We know they have contact with the Green Elves and even with the Ents, right? But they're leaving the story of, the Noldor and the Sindar. They're very much retiring from the scene of action entirely. But Galadriel's there, right? Which makes it look less like a departure, off into the far country, into the wild on their own, into unknown lands and out of the story, right? I mean, it's so that was one kind of interesting dynamic that I thought. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Like, that's where we've left Galadriel so far. Are we going to do anything else with Galadriel, by the way? Do we have future plans for Galadriel? Is she going to stay in us? How long is she going to stay in Osiriand? Are we going to...
Well, she said in Lord of the Rings that she crosses the mountains before the fall of Nargothrond.
Right. Time's running out.
Okay. So we do need to make future plans for Galadriel, I think would be the best way of putting that. And how we're going to
the extent to which we're going to incorporate that.
So there was a little bit of a concern that we brought her maybe too far in the path towards her Lord of the Rings persona, because she was hanging out with Melian, and Celeborn was such a reasonable guy and such a great listener that she progressed quite a bit in season 4. Right. So she needs to try to take something over pretty soon. And probably Osiriand would be what she would try to take over.
Well, that's where she is. So
so she should do that. But obviously it's not going to work out. So we'll have to figure out what's going on and what her relationship is with Dior, if anything.
Right. It's got to be post Beren and Luthien. Yeah. Is that?
Yeah. So there's stuff to think through with her character. Now that all her brothers are dead, she has to have a different approach than she did before.
I think the key is somehow finding a way to separate her from Celeborn.
Well,
I couldn't possibly have any inspiration for that idea from anywhere.
Yeah.
But that
makes sense. I mean, she is separated.
Having missed the opportunity to come up with vengeful Galadriel, which would have suited our purposes perfectly. And it really, given the events at the end of this season,
we will always be first to PTSD Galadriel. So
that's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. But it would have been really cool to have, after Sauron flees Beleriand, having Galadriel chasing him down
Right.
Like that would have been cool.
Would have been cool.
But I feel like going that far might be a little too far. Separating her from Celeborn, I feel a little bit less a certain type of way about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one question would be, and I'm sorry, I fully realize I'm opening up a huge can of post season 6 worms in asking this question, but she could have some involvement post departure of Melian and death of Thingol, right? Could she come with Dior and be like the Melian figure after Melian's gone?
Yeah, she could engage in a little anti-Feanorian kinslaying.
Well, I'm just saying, like, we know Doriath post Thingol is not going to end well, right? So if we want her to be sort of seizing power, not radically inappropriately, but not super well, exactly, yeah, doing some puppetry stuff, which is not going to end well, right? I'm not saying that the second kinslaying is going to be her fault, right? But like, she doesn't. She wouldn't be.
Well, she might
advise
against. She might advise against surrendering the Silmarillion.
I was going to say, someone has
clearly
to tell
the move.
Yeah. So someone's got to tell Dior not to listen to the letter.
Yeah.
Because if he just decides all by himself, and everyone around him is telling him, please hand it over, then it's him holding on to the Silmaril, right? Which we might decide we want him to do. It depends what we do with his story, because he doesn't quite exist yet.
Yeah, we got to think about those two things.
But yeah, I would say Dior's story might involve Galadriel, and as far as going east, we're going to have to figure out what sends her in that direction. So the fall of Doriath could do it if we don't care about timelines, which, I mean,
we can be flexible.
Not sure how much we care about the timelines, but if we want it to be earlier, it could be Nernice related or something.
Can I just say how hard it is for me to get up in arms about Galadriel and Celeborn timelines, for crying out loud? I mean, talk about your choose your own adventure timeline. I mean,
right. Yes. Just pick one. Actually pick all 4 of them and
exactly. I mean,
and then adhere to none of them.
And how old they are at the time.
Right. I mean, even that line, Ilana, that you were quoting, about before the fall of Nargothrond and Gondolin, is not exactly a timeline that Tolkien was himself considering sacred later on.
Right.
So Yep.
But in this episode, the main thing is to set up Galadriel and Aragorn, essentially.
Right. Oh yeah. No, I was smelling that. That was fun. That was the whole the business with the ring of Barahir was, and again, this is one of the wonderful delights of film, right? To be able to create scenes whose payoff is going to come in 15 seasons, right? Awesome. It's just so cool. So yeah, I loved that stuff. I loved those seeds. Anyway,
Galadriel telling Beren that she'll recognize his descendants by that ring. Yeah, I was like, okay, that works.
yeah, exactly. Especially, of course, I mean, having that's one place where the Galadriel Arwen frame stuff in this season also works kind of. I know that's not what's going on in this episode. We're already with Arwen and Aragorn together by the time we get this, but still, I mean, it's like
and she knows she's not going to see Beren again.
Right.
I mean,
exactly. I mean, it makes me think of Elrond talking to Frodo about Bilbo, right? Unless you return to visit again very soon, right?
Yeah.
That's the same thing with Galadriel and Doriath, right?
And that's what's so weird about the feeling of how the elves are handling this wedding. It's every elf attending the wedding is like, he's totally going to be dead really soon. And so Galadriel is telling Luthien, if you want to come visit me after,
Yeah.
She doesn't have to specify after what, just, after, because there's going to be an after to this.
When you're preparing to spend eternity as a widow.
Yes.
Yeah. Like you might want to get away for a while because that sounds like it would be real difficult. So
right.
You can come hang out. Yeah. Like, so that, like, congratulations on your wedding and my condolences.
Right.
I'm always here for you.
Yeah.
It's terrible, isn't it?
It was another thing that I really liked about the Syros conversation. Like it's important to put that out there explicitly on the table. Right. And yeah, you're a jerk to actually say it out loud, but fortunately we have Syros for that. So that's good. But yeah, no, I mean, it's also, it's a clear reality. I mean, there has got to be a way, this wedding like has to have been almost almost a time of mourning for the elves, right? I mean, like that's got to be woven all through any sense of joy that they have for Luthien.
Well, they're not anticipating losing Luthien out of this, so
no. Which is, of course, the irony. Yeah.
So, and that's why, I mean, having children is for Luthien, like this is what's going to matter.
Right.
And that's realization that Thingol comes to later as well.
Right.
That's what's going to matter.
Yeah.
Because I mean, otherwise it's a blink of an eye and that's it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm glad let's not miss Morwen and Rian, whom we have seen, but only seen as like children on the side, basically. Kind of like we met them briefly, but
Rian's got a scene with Baron in
episode
the Brethel episode.
Yeah, but this is the first time we're having scenes from their point of view, so it is very much a preview for the next season.
Yeah,
and I appreciated having a chance to kind of think about them as characters and who they're going to end up with as partners. And I mean, obviously we know a lot more about Morwen's story than we know about Rian's, but
man, I felt that every single line of Morwen's in Doriath was like so painful, painfully ironic to read.
Yeah.
I lines like, "Would you not prefer to remain here with your son?" And I'm like, oh, God. Okay, constantly.
I didn't even think of the irony.
It's like every single line she has is dripping with Turin related irony. Yeah. No, I was like, even like when they were talking about like before. I'm trying to find the other lines, like something about like, before you depart, or anyway, there were. I felt like every single time I was feeling like the ghost of Turin Bar was sort of floating across there. Yeah.
I only just now recognized that there's some irony in Hurin's word, not irony. There's something about Hurin's words about Morwen after she dies, when he says that she was not conquered.
Right.
When put into the context of Rian's death.
Right. Right.
Which I'm not 100% sure Hurin even knows about.
But think about the clear parallel there, right? Of Rian dying on the Hill of the Slain and Morwen dying at the tombstone of Turin and Nienor.
Yeah. But in a very different context. Exactly. Like Morwen just would not give up until it was all over and she's old.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. No, it was one of the things, Ilana, what you were saying about like first getting to like spend time with them as characters. It's really, especially Rian, Morwen to a much lesser extent, but Rihanna especially is kind of, I mean, we never really get to know her in the story. She's like, we know her from like one detail, like the fact that she went, laid herself down on the hill of the slain and died is Rihanna's I mean, okay, like Tuor is also her contribution to the story, but as far as like actions that she performs, right, apart from giving birth,
she's also that much younger than Morwen, which kind of helped here, because I mean they both went from, they're both refugees from the Dagol Bragalach, and that's kind of what I was starting with, that they were at different ages when they had to make that perilous journey. Emeldir leading them with their fathers left behind, and so I thought, well, these are two different kind of responses to that trauma, and they're also different ages. So I was trying to kind of build that into support for where they are with their characters now. So Morwen's a lot more serious and a lot less kind of, in some ways, less resilient, and yet. She's more sort of stoic, but whereas Rian is happy to get involved in the fairy and kind of like fantasy wedding sort of stuff and pick flowers and so on. So he kind of recovers more quickly, but also is more quick to spook.
Right. Yeah. No, it's great. It's fun to be able to, because I mean, on the one hand, the like smaller contributions to stories that we know they have later on kind of looms large in our imagination as we're thinking about these characters, but it's that can't only define them. I mean, like the fun adventure, right, is to kind of fill in the character in a way that the thing that we know Rihanna's eventually going to do is going to make sense, is going to fit within the character and the story arc that she gets, but not merely be defined, that character arc not to be merely defined by that one incident at the end. To have that not be all of her character. But anyway, I thought that was a lot of fun. I thought Emeldir was very discreet in her disapproval of Thingol. She could have said much more and much worse, but she didn't.
I think she did last episode, didn't she? Didn't we have hers?
She could speak more freely in Brethel, I think, and would have also gotten the worst of it out of her system in her initial reactions. So she's had time to think of her words before this happens.
Right. Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, good. And we talked about the Karkaroth attack there a little bit, so let's talk about the hunt for the wolf more. So the exclusion, that seems like a strong word, but basically like Baron's non-invitation to the hunt at first was a really interesting sort of move. In the book, which at that point is telling it not quite, but almost from Baron's point of view, right? I mean, like what we hear when the news of the wolf comes in, we're immediately told that Baron knew that like the quest was not yet achieved, right? So you get the impression within the published story that this is Baron's hunt, right? And he lets Thingol and Beleg and Mablung accompany him, right? But of course it that worked itself out very, very differently in the script, and I thought that was really interesting. The way, I mean, it made a lot of sense the way that came together. And that element was there. His perception and insistence was good, but I kind of liked this version.
The Baron and Luthien story is very much from their points of view.
Right.
And that means that you have people doing things in their story that don't make a lot of sense and don't fit. And while we can preserve their viewpoints when we're telling their story, we do have to make the other characters act as themselves. Like, just because Luthien sees the world a certain way doesn't mean that perspective works for everyone.
Right.
So yeah, Thingol is king of Doriath. Beleg is chief huntsman. Like, if there's going to be a hunt for a wolf and they're going along, it's their hunt. And
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
It's Thingol's job after all, not necessarily for him to go out after every invader personally, but it's his responsibility. He started this whole thing, and I think that one of the things that
But I was also thinking about the last time you had Thingol going out, which was just before the girdle went up. That was several seasons ago.
Yeah.
I had that in mind when I was writing this, that was, he had that role as chief leader, military leader, and so on at that point. They haven't been in that situation since then, because they've had the girdle.
If Thingol believes that his people are under threat, he will personally get involved. That's pretty clear. He doesn't even get involved in the wars of Northern Valerian because he doesn't think of those as his problem. He didn't start this big fight with Morgoth up there.
That's right.
And he feels safe behind the girdle. He feels that his people are safe.
Right.
Well, and he doesn't. He explicitly doesn't do anything until Karkaroth crosses the girdle. I mean, that's
right. Even I love that moment too. Again, which it didn't get a huge spotlight put on it, but that when Beren and Thingol both hear about the wolf on the borders, and Beren's immediate first response is thinking about his mother and his people, and oh my goodness, this is and Thingol's immediately like, well, but it didn't cross the girdle, so it's fine. Like, it's not it'll probably wander off, whatever, it's not a big deal. And the way in which Beren is really alarmed, and Thingol just it's a non-issue yet. This isn't really news, and doesn't become news until it crosses that contrast I thought was really interesting. But yeah, anyway, so I thought, the constitution of the hunting, but this is Thingol doing his job, right? Getting the best of his people together to hunt the wolf, allowing Beren to come, right? But even that, this sort of, I felt it was I really liked the degree of tentativeness there. Right.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't invited. Like, they didn't seek him out. They were like, well, obviously we're going to bring Beren along. Right. They also didn't resist it. Like, oh, Beren, you shouldn't come. Right. I think it was Mablung, right, who was like, you've done enough. It's okay. You can stay home. Right. Which is fine. Like, that's a sensible and kindly thing to say. But again, nobody was like, stay home,
definitely
fragile
not.
Human. You definitely can't come.
But
and yet,
Thingol should feel like, I really don't want to risk your life in particular.
Right, exactly. Like,
because risking your life is risking my daughter's life.
And also, like, I've repented from the whole sending you to your death thing. I'd really not like to invite you to your death now. I mean, it would be at the very least a horrible irony, if not. Like, the optics would be really bad if you came along with me on the hunt and died. And what on earth would I tell your mother now? Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I felt like the degree of resistance felt.
Well, and I decided that any conversation that might have happened about Luthien coming along too could happen off screen. That we didn't need to deal with that. I mean, like, by the time they're on the hunt, he's clearly okay with Luthien being there as well.
Right. So. Right. Yeah, that was a really interesting choice too. That was one of the things that I was interested to see. And I know we've talked about this in the past, that it's really hard to imagine Luthien just not coming, just staying home in Menegroth at the hunt for the wolf. But then again, like, you put Luthien in the middle of things, and how does that change the situation? So the way that the sort of fight choreography at the end manipulated Luthien sort of out of the picture, so as to enable, Thingol and Beren to be, fighting the wolf together, as is described in the book. She had to be I mean, she came along, but
there wasn't much space for her to be effectual in anything. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's hard though. I mean, the challenging thing, right, is that like Luthien's never ineffectual, so it's hard to, but yeah, like I can't see how she could actually be integrated into the fight itself without dominating. I mean, Luthien never loses, so I mean, yeah. Anyway,
except for this time when she loses Baron.
Yeah,
she tries to heal him and fails.
Right. Right.
Which is kind of predicted by the episode where she's trying to heal him after when he gets shot.
Yeah. Yeah. The infection. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So no, I thought that was
you'd think they would have had the good sense to bring a veterinarian along with them on this trip.
Are you thinking of Finrod and Ben Bayar again? Yes. Yes. But yeah. No, so I thought that was even the way in which she was sort of not involved until she comes in and sees Baron, lying there mortally wounded. Her sort of acceptance of their doom, in this way, like that. Anyway, I thought it was the ending was I don't know if I want to say it necessarily, almost like unexpectedly peaceful, especially with the whispering and everything. We don't get Luthien's extravagant grief or something like that, right? Like this is but then again, it all does happen pretty fast at the end of the episode too.
The only reason we're not getting Luthien's grief here is because it cuts off.
Right.
So we will start the next episode with.
There's going to be plenty of Luthien grief to come.
Yes. Yeah. Though the quality of that grief, I think, is that's going to be interesting to do.
Yeah, which is why it's a story for the next episode, because we have to get into a lot with what she's going through.
That's more shock at this point than.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Agreed. Yes. Yes. And the Ring of Bari here. By the way, one of the I just like that. I was so struck by the end of the episode. The giving of the Silmaril to Baron and Baron giving it to Thingol, right? Mm-hmm. The quest is achieved. And just the visual image you were describing. After a moment, Mablung kneels next to Luthien and gently takes Baron's hand and removes the Ring of Barahir. He tries to offer it to Luthien, who does not register the offer. Mablung stands next to Thingol and holds the Ring of Barahir. Thingol stands in horror with the light of the Silmaril shining from his hand. That sentence is so awesome. like him standing in horror with the light of the Silmaril shining from his hand. Like there's like that tableau, right, of Luthien kneeling next to the corpse of Baron and the corpse of Huan, right? And then Mablung standing there holding the Ring of Barahir and Thingol sitting there holding the Silmaril in his hand, right? The contrast. This is another one of those wonderful things where I admit that in some ways, I think I had never really pictured that element, right? Like Thingol standing in grief with the light of the Silmaril radiating, from his hand, like the contrast between the light of the Silmaril, the beauty, of the light of the Silmaril and the grief and horror of the scene, sort of the full contrast of that, had never really kind of visually kind of come home to me, I think. So I really loved that. And again, there was something about the, adding the Ring of Barahir to that, which was kind of more poignant, and more and more fun with these two different symbols. The Ring of Barahir being this elvish thing, which is a symbol of the connection between elves and humans, right? From Finrod's original oath, and the way that has, in its way, right, reached its fulfillment in Beren and Luthien's own relationship, right? Especially with the way that the giving of the Ring of Barahir became almost wedding ring-ish, right? Not quite, but almost, in the way it gets returned. I mean, it's returned right there, like after their wedding. And anyway, it was, and
it got me thinking about, what Thingol's going to do with the Silmaril now that he has it, and the impetus to put it in the Nauglamir, and the weight of what that Silmaril represents now for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that as well.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because it's not just the beauty of the Silmaril. And yeah, I think that this might be kind of an excuse in Thingol's mind, but the value of the Silmaril is so much greater because of what it costs.
Right. Right. Yeah,
because of what his daughter went through for that to arrive back.
At this point, it's not the loss of his daughter that's the issue. It's,
right.
And now I don't 100% believe that's really the major thing driving him. I think it's really the desire for this beautiful thing.
Sure, yeah.
But that's what he's telling himself at the very least.
Well, and it's clearly a big part of the picture, because I mean it's
not nothing for
awesome.
Sure. Yeah.
No, exactly. I mean, the Silmaril's awesome, but when the Fëanorians demand it, he's going to say no. I mean, yes, his own desire for it factors into that as well, but to them, surely, the Fëanorians, that is, surely there can be no shadow of a justification of his keeping it, right? What on earth right do you have to the Silmaril, Thingol, right? Like you, especially Mr. I want nothing to do with Noldor things, right?
Isn't that explicit in the Silmarillion, in the published Silmarillion, that Thingol is thinking about the price of
absolutely, yeah. And yes, the way that this brings, like this means this. It now means to him, in a sense, it is much more personal to him, of much more personal significance, even than it has to the Sons of Fëanor, frankly, right? To them it is like, I mean, yes, they have the oath, I know, but
and Dad made them.
But that's him. That's at one remove. Like, that's not personal. That's
but re-swearing the oath while their dad's dying is kind of about as personal as Thingol standing there while Beren's dying. I mean, it's
okay.
Anyway,
right. Yeah, I don't think you're going to convince Marie that the Fëanorians don't have a better claim on the Silmarils than Thingol does.
I hear that. I'm not going to try to make that argument, but at the very least, I felt that last scene does a really powerful job of showing how this is a discussion, right? Why this is going to make sense to Thingol, not even just because I do think I would lean Nick more towards saying, yes, I think his desire for the Silmaril is a factor, and yes, to some extent, I think that he's rationalizing why to keep the Silmaril, but I don't think it's just the Silmaril isn't the ring of power. People,
no, yeah,
I think people too often confuse the desire for the Silmarils with the desire for the ring. They're not the same.
Well, the desire for the ring masquerades itself at times as a desire for a beautiful thing, which the ring isn't that
particularly beautiful. No,
right.
I mean, and even the moments when that gets emphasized, the disjunction there. So how perfect was its roundness, right? I mean, come on. Okay, it's a real round ring, right? Yeah, that's very impressive and everything, right?
The hunt for the wolf for Thingol was about protecting his kingdom. It wasn't about retrieving the Silmaril was not something that was
an
even
afterthought.
about. I mean,
Yes.
Beren says, this is still part of the quest. But from Thingol's perspective, this is about killing the wolf.
Yes.
Yeah, because otherwise he would have gone after the wolf before.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Yes. 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 Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, as soon as it was within spitting distance, you'd be going after it.
And
there's
that's
like
part of Thingol's repentance, isn't it? That he no longer actually wants the Silmaril. That's not
right.
It was.
He named it
it
in
wasn't about
Desire
that. It was
before,
about
but
sending Beren. It was about. It wasn't about getting the Silmaril. It was about getting Beren off the picture. That was what it was about.
Right. And it's still about that even now, as it turns out, sadly. But yeah. Whoa, hang on. I just did something strange with my mouse here. Okay. Anyway, but just as well. Actually, okay, look at that. Hey, we're pretty much done. Other thoughts, other things that you guys wanted to, I think we hit on all of the major points that I had been planning to talk about. Other things you wanted to mention, or questions you wanted to ask about the script, or about particular choices that you found yourself making?
I have a very important question.
Okay.
It's not necessarily an episode 12 question, but on his way back to Menegroth, should Thingol keep the Silmaril in a bag or carry it bare in his hand? It's a very important question.
This is a very important question.
Marie, you're muted in case you're trying.
I think she's deliberately muted. Yeah.
I didn't actually say any of that out loud. I was just mouthing it.
Self-muting. Okay. He's got to hold it.
Really? The whole way back to Menegroth in his hand?
I think he's got to.
Okay. All right.
I mean, so first of all, you've got something. You're holding a Silmaril, right? Mm-hmm. One of the most precious things in the world. You're just gonna put it in a pouch, right? I'm just gonna be like, yeah, I've got some loose change, and like whatever. Oh, and a snack for later, and a Silmaril. Jumbled in together there, right? Is this exactly what Marie was saying?
No, it's funny because like the position was given to me as, well, they didn't bring a bag specifically for this. I was like, yeah, but you want to protect this thing and keep it safe. You could empty your Cheetos out onto the floor and put the Silmarils in, which Marie then really objected to getting Cheeto dust on the Silmarils. Which
exactly, no, that's it. I can't see it. I can't see it, but okay. But more to me, it just seems like, especially with again thinking about that final moment, right? I mean, he just received the Silmaril from Beren's dying hand, right? With Beren's dying words. And they're going to now process back to Menegroth, right? With Beren's body.
They're going to bury it there.
Are they going to bury it there? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. It's going to take them several days to get back. It's going to be kind of stinky. And the elves don't really have a procedure for the preservation of bodies,
the embalming route.
I just I feel a little weird about the idea of Thingol carrying this thing in his hand the whole way back to Menegroth.
I hear that, but it's hard to imagine him doing otherwise under the circumstances. I mean,
so is he just going to carry it around in his hand the entire time once he gets back to Menegroth? Because the same argument, where is he going to put it?
He's going to hand it to his wife. That's what he's going to do.
And let it be her problem to deal with.
Yeah. Well, I don't think she'll take it, but I think that would be his impulse.
Mm.
Don't tempt me.
When he's with that gem, I should have beauty too great and terrible.
She'd be like, "Is there a ring attached to this?" Or
right, exactly.
I've got a question about this episode.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah,
solve the problem,
The
which is about
controversy.
Huan's involvement in this.
Oh yeah.
And how that
I
came
didn't talk
across.
about Huan. You're right. I forgot to talk about
Oh,
Huan
no,
almost
we-
entirely.
and-
Yeah.
Yeah. And
You've left out one of the
his
chief
last words
characters.
which, as you point out, Tolkien never wrote his last words. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really liked Huan's last words. So let me go back to Huan's last words. Yeah, his very last words I especially liked. Think you that this is the end? This is not the end. So Huan is the one with the spoilers. That it's not the end of the season, right? And of course, everybody knows there's one episode left in the season, but that his words are the only indication that there is more to come. I thought awesome. Like, I thought it was really great in the sense that, so on the one hand, there's something kind of sweet about the third, Huor is prophesied. Huor. I'm just going to say random H names now. Huan is prophesied to speak 3 times, right? They'll come to think of it, I don't think Huor does speak 3 times, does he? Anyway, never mind. Point is, Huan is prophesied to speak 3 times, giving therefore like some kind of like way. It's like every time he speaks has to be super important, right? There has to be something that he's accomplishing. And although I always found the concept of his last words, and then the third time Huan spoke with words to say farewell to Beren and Luthien, that's kind of sweet and everything. But I have to admit I was always a little disappointed by it, right? I mean, obviously you're about to die, you still have one last time to speak. You might as well use it, right? I mean, it said, this is it. So, but again, it didn't feel like, especially since we weren't told what it was. It was so what's the effect? What is
farewell? That's what we're told. He says farewell to.
He says farewell. Yeah, he says farewell to the both of them. And again, I'm not saying that's nothing. I'm not saying it doesn't accomplish anything, but it hardly seems like, and 3 times you shall. That there should be giving him a little bit of a prophecy at the end so that his final words are a prophecy of what's to come. That Huan, about to die, is the only one. With the possible exception of Luthien, who sees what is coming, right? Thingol, of course, doesn't suspect what is coming to him, what is coming to Luthien, right?
But I was also thinking, what Sam says. This is the same story. The end is not even next episode. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Huan is anticipating that Frodo and Sam will be in the same story still later on, right? Yeah. No, that's fun. So anyway, I liked that move to add that element of foretelling to Huan there at the end, and especially since again it's really the only, apart from the whispering that we don't hear, it's the only note in that final scene which really points to the future to come. Because again, all of that work within this episode about the shortness of human lives and in her wedding, not just in her marriage but in her wedding ceremony itself, Luthien she might as well just put on a black veil at the wedding as far as the rest of the elves are concerned, right? You are
deliberately turning yourself into a widow.
Into a widow. It's I now pronounce you,
man and widow.
Imminent corpse and widow, right? Is kind of what the elves are all thinking, right? When that's happening. So anyway, so that and of course it comes to pass, right? By the end of this very episode, that comes to pass. And we see the widowhood come upon her, which she always knew was coming, and everybody always knew was coming. But nobody sees that inevitable end of the story is not the end of the story at all, except for Huan, right? So, that was definitely my favorite thing about Huan's final words. I loved Huan as thoughtful, wise, though inarticulate counselor. That was sort of fun all the way through, right? When he was, putting in his canine 2 cents in the questions of what they should and shouldn't do as far as pursuing the wolf and everything, right? His clearly being on Baron's side when Baron was concerned for everybody outside the girdle, and Thingol's like, well, let's just hunker down inside the shelter and we'll be okay. Anyway, so there were a lot of elements there that I thought were fun. I thought just simply kind of bringing Huan into this sphere, like the Doriath sphere, like connecting Huan with Beleg and Mablung and Thingol and that whole world, really was kind of delightful, because we don't ever really see that exactly in the book.
Oh, he just sort of appears, doesn't he, in the story?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was trying to remember while I was saying that, like, what are we even told in the book about how he gets there?
Oh, we told, along with Baron went, and then he's listed amongst the people.
He's just listed among the people go to hunt for the wolf, but we don't know how he got there in the first place, right?
Right. So
he comes into that part of the story the same way Thurngwethel does.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he was apparently just there. But he says goodbye to them before they go to Angband and says, I'm gonna meet what you meet at the gate. Like he says, I'm gonna be back in the story.
Right.
And then he's there for the hunt for the wolf. But what did Huan do in the entire interim? So that was something we had to discuss and figure out where he'd been and what he'd been doing a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Tolkien neglected to inform us of that part of the story.
Yes, exactly. So no, I thought, and the idea that, so like the rumor of the madness of the wolf is spreading across Beleriand, and Huan would have heard that, and that he would pursue, and hunt Karkaroth himself, feeling that to be, his duty and his quest in some sense, makes perfect sense that he would connect with Beleg like that, and then come back. So I loved how that all worked, and as I say, it's one of the things that I was feeling. It was one of those things, again, which happens a lot in film context, when you get to fill in a gap that you didn't like. I never really felt it to be missing. Like but when I get it, I'm like, oh man, I was missing this all along. Like, again, the idea of Huan meeting Beleg, for instance, like Beleg and Huan having a day out together. I'm like, I needed that in my life. Like, that's a thing I that's a connection I wanted to make. And even the way in which he is embraced and admired and accepted by all of the elves of Doriath, right? Seemed like just a really delightful sort of final chapter for him after the ugly breakup with Celegorm, right? That I thought that was
well, he has a big reputation preceding him,
right?
That they all know,
right? Yeah, exactly. And the way he's kind of taken in as a celebrity, despite being not only a Noldor friend but a Fëanorian friend, all the way. I mean, he's been associated with Celegorm for a long time.
Luthien and Beren have told their story by now, so
right. It's any friend of Luthien is a friend of ours, come across the girdle Huan situation. Right. But it is true that he is really the only Fëanorian who ever got into Doriath by being invited.
Yeah, exactly. And that, so anyway, I just, there were a bunch of things about that particular dynamic that I felt. I mean, again, it's filling in a gap that is really necessary to fill in if you're going to go through the story in more detail like we are. But again, more than that, it felt really satisfying in that way. I thought that was great, especially the way that we get like the Fëanorians and Doriath, like the political kind of framework of Doriath and the Fëanorians through the letter from Celegorm and all that stuff, right, that we got. It was almost like a kind of resolution to that. Not fully. I mean, obviously things aren't resolved precisely between the Feanorians and Doriath. I'm not suggesting that, but within this season, right, it seemed almost like a kind of
a final note kind of thing.
Yeah, well, a note of friendship, a note of hope. It's not, again, it's not a reconciliation between the Feanorians and them, but because of course that's the point. Huan is no longer associated with the Feanorians, right? He has distanced himself from the Feanorians, but seeing him connected with the Elves of Doriath. Anyway, I thought that was great fun. And as I say, I loved the prophecy at the end. All right, but it is getting late. Next time, we are going to be, 2 weeks from tonight, on June 15th, we're going to be talking about the season 6 finale. We will be doing the big episode, the Mandos episode. So I can't wait for the Mandos episode. So we will see. We will see how we bring things to a conclusion here in season 6. I'm trying to think of all of our season finales where this kind of stacks up in terms of like anticipation and the need for payoff, right? It's pretty high. This one
only the center of the Silmarillion.
That's
no
it.
Big deal.
Only the big payoff at the end of the most important story. So
keep in mind that season 2 ends with the darkening of Valinor, and season 5 ended with the duel between Fingolfin and Morgoth. So
comparatively easy.
Yeah,
I'm here to tell you.
I understand that,
especially for me, because like it's that.
Yeah.
Not
I'm just
difficult.
saying there was probably similarly high expectations for those as well.
It's true, though. Yeah, in a lot of ways, I can see this being more difficult.
This is more challenging to write, of course.
It is more challenging, and even just conceptually, like the darkening of Valinor is a big deal, but we kind of we know the plot, right? I mean the whole shape and outline of that story is clear, and there are decisions for us still to make, right? In the darkening of Valinor, like, are we going to actually have Morgoth, pee on Manway's throne, for instance? No, we didn't do that. But anyhow, it's in Morgoth's ring. Like, anyway, okay, he doesn't say that he pees on it exactly.
He wrecks the thrones. Yes.
No, he doesn't wreck it. He defiles it.
Yeah,
he defiles the throne.
So what he does. Never mind.
Anyway, never mind.
That is not the bodily function I have imagined from that.
Yeah. Anyway. So it's not that there weren't choices to make. It's all I'm saying. There were choices to be made, but yeah, this is a different situation. And a real
you have to actually
question.
tell a whole story.
Yeah, you have to tell a whole story, but also like
it's a story that could very easily be lacking in drama.
Yes.
It would be all too easy to just tell that story and have it feel inevitable from start to finish. And
here's the other real challenge. Among the real challenges. So the payoff of the end of this, like, what is the end of the story exactly? Like, where does the story end? With the resurrection? With the moving to Osirian? And where that ending is, what is the payoff for the rest of the story? Like the end of the story in the Silmarillion has always felt to me really like uncertain, really unclear in its way. Like there is not the same kind of there's not the kind of obvious payoff.
But this is I come back again to Sam saying we're still in the same story, and I think it's because there isn't an end, and also Legolas saying the line of Luthien will never fail.
Will never fail. Yes,
it's the line of Luthien that continues through the whole thing.
Yep, and that's certainly one of the big anyway, there's some, but of course then also thinking about the sort of arc and shape that we've been giving to this season, right? And the whole the whole release from bondage theme that we've been developing all the way through. Where do you come down on that? How do you pay that off in the context of this final episode? Especially since I do not think that the Beren and Luthien story, it's tempting to think, like the first knee-jerk reaction is, well, Beren escapes from death, right? Just as, Luthien has been springing him out of prison all time, right? And now she's sprung him out of the biggest prison that there is. So Beren has escaped from death. Hooray! That's the release from bondage, right? That's not the release from bondage that's happening.
If anything, he sprung her from the biggest prison there is.
Exactly. So that's the kind of ambiguity at the end of the story, right? And yeah, paying that off is going to be fun to discuss. So anyway, looking forward to a brilliant script 2 weeks from tonight. It's going to be great. I can't wait. I can't wait. This is going to be completely epic. I want to say, and then I want to make sure to get to the reminder there. So afterwards in July, we're going to be looking at the artwork contributions. So people who have ideas for costumes, props, with the biggest prop, I mean, we're going to need are we going to have the Nauglamir yet? Are we presenting the Nauglamir, or is that a next season, or that is a future one?
It was created in this season.
Commissioned, but we're not going to show it.
The Nauglamir itself, yes.
The Nauglamir itself.
It's shown in the season because Finrod has to wear it, and he's dead already.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. So we're gonna need a Nauglamir, which is a big
Nauglamir is one option of something to create artwork for. Correct.
It would be really, really neat to see people's ideas about the Nauglamir.
Ring of Bear here is also available for people who want to design jewelry.
Yeah, we don't have a final
form on that.
We've talked about it several times.
We keep not getting it right.
Has the Iron Crown been designed yet?
There was at least a sketch at one point.
Bree is definitely drawn it, if I recall correctly.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be interesting to think about. I mean, this is, in a sense, this is the place where the Iron Crown really matters, right?
Mm.
I mean, we get the image of it at the end of season 2, right? But that's its presentation. But this is where it kind of
did we decide that it was one of the Silmaril that he takes out of the crown is one of the ones that would make it asymmetrical rather than the center one?
We did.
Yeah,
I think we did. Yeah, we want him to look maximally awkward with his 2 Silmarils. He's gonna have to totally redesign the Iron Crown
without touching the Silmarils.
Yeah, without touching the Silmarils. Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Morgoth is well past creating anything at this point. So.
Yep. Agreed.
He'll have to wear it at an angle. So
right. He's wearing the Iron Crown at a jaunty angle. Yeah, that's exactly it. Right. Looking kind of like Biggie Smalls or something. Anyway, so, okay. Anyway.
Too soon?
Too soon? Okay. Anyway, okay, all right. So the point is, it would be fun to get more artwork contributions. Also, we're sets as well. Now, some of the sets most of the regions we've already pretty well established here. But do it
like Luthien's Treehouse, things like that.
Luthien's Treehouse, yeah, we some concepts for that. Even the setup for the final battle here by the Iskalduin would be nice to be able to kind of see that a little bit more clearly.
Wants to design the house that didn't get finished.
Yeah. The house that was not to be. Anyhow,
Man,
so
I really want to do that now when all the spare time I don't have.
yes. Yes. Anyway, so those are things we're not going to talk about those things next time. But so there's still a little bit of time to do some sketching and creating and whatever. So we will talk about that stuff in July. All right. Thank you very much, Alana.
Creature design for Karkaroth. Also
creature
available.
design for Karkaroth. Yeah. That's another thing we definitely will want to see. Also, like before and after Karkaroth, right? That would be, really interesting concepts there. Would love to have more film concept art. That would be really cool. Anyway, Ilana, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your wonderful work on this script. I really enjoyed the script. I've had a fun discussion.
It's a really great way to get inside the story in a different way, I'll tell you.
Yeah. And is this the second or third script that you've done this season?
The second. I did
It's
the
the second.
Finrod song about episode 6.
Yeah, you did the song battle one, I remember. Yeah.
So I wrote the letter from Kelligorm as well.
Right. Right. Yes, the highly impolitic letter from Kelligorm. Yes. Yeah. Cool. Poor Gil Galad. Anyway, still remembering the awkward political position we put Gil-galad in. With
I imagine he spent a fair amount of of that episode in the not prison cell where Galadriel, Ignor, and Finrod were kept when Thingol discovered the kinslaying.
Yeah. Oh, and
he may still be there during the wedding because I didn't put him in the wedding scene. I thought about it.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, I almost forgot here at the last second. My favorite cameo of the whole script, Gallion the butler. Holy cow. That was so awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody comes serving drinks and he's like, "Thank you, Gallion." And I was like, yes. Oh,
Butler to the great.
Yeah. Oh man. That was fantastic.
Before he rose to butler status.
Exactly. He's just a waiter. He's going to be the butler for Thranduil down the road. Yes. Yeah, exactly. This was in his early days, in his long
career of service.
Yeah, it's so good. So good. Just loved that. I almost forgot to comment on that. There's so many fun notes like that. Yes, I'm so glad I remembered that before we finished, as I was saying goodbye. So anyway, Alana, again, thank you again. This was so much fun. I'm so glad that you could join us. Thank you, Nick and Marie, as always. Can't wait for episode 13. Going to be great fun. And we will see everybody next time. So I will say, as always, thanks for listening and Godspeed.